"Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stand." Those words just sort of cut through the calm of the cabin. Dominique Reynolds glanced up, a little surprised, her hand still resting on the cool glass of champagne next to her. A flight attendant was standing right over her, a smile plastered on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her voice was polite, sure, but it had an edge to it you could sharpen a knife on. And right behind her stood a man in a crisp grey suit, one hand resting on the divider, looking for all the world like he already owned the place. Before Dominique could even form a question, the man leaned past the attendant and placed his fancy briefcase on the floor. The message couldn't have been clearer. "You're in my way." You could see other passengers turning their heads. Phones started to tilt up just a little. That quiet, comfortable murmur of first class just stopped. "This gentleman," the attendant said, smooth as butter, "is our preferred guest. We've had a small seating adjustment. We'll have to ask you to move to a seat in premium economy." A preferred guest. Dominique just blinked. She had booked this suite, this very seat, weeks ago. It cost more than some folks' rent for a month. Her boarding pass, with seat 2A printed right on it, was sitting there on the armrest, a quiet little testament to her right to be there. But now some stranger was being shown into her seat, and all it took was a nice sounding phrase. A seating adjustment. Dominique Reynolds didn't get to where she was building Nexus systems from the ground up by letting people just move her out of the way. At 42, she had a certain calm about her, the kind you get when you know exactly what you're worth. Her dress, a deep burgundy she'd picked out for a big board meeting the next day, was simple but fit perfectly. It was a lot like the company she'd spent the last 2 decades building. Her mind drifted back to her grandmother, Eloise, who had raised her back on the east side of Detroit. "Honey," she used to tell her, "this world will try to make you small for 2 reasons. Because you're a woman, and because you're black. Your job is to just be there, so solid they can't ignore you, and you don't have to shout to do it." The flight attendant, Veronica Miller, according to her name tag, shifted from one foot to the other. The white of her uniform seemed almost too bright against the soft cream color of the seats. Her blue eyes had a look of practiced patience, the kind that feels less like good service and more like she was waiting for you to just get on with it. Dominique took a slow, deep breath, feeling the silent attention of at least 20 other people. The man in the grey suit was still standing there, still waiting. He glanced at his watch, as if she were a minor delay in his very important day. "This is my seat," she said at last, her voice even and calm as she held up her boarding pass. "I chose this specific one when I booked." Veronica's smile got a little tighter. "I understand that, ma'am, but we have what's called operational discretion for our preferred passengers. Mr. Walker here has priority status. James Walker." The name didn't ring a bell, but the way Veronica said it, with such reverence, you'd think he was royalty. He seemed to stand a little taller then, puffing out his chest just a bit. "I'm sure you'll find premium economy is perfectly comfortable." Veronica went on, her voice now a low, confidential whisper. She sounded like she was sharing a delicate secret, not kicking a paying customer out of her seat. "It's only for this one flight. After all, just this one flight. Just this one little piece of dignity. Just this one time to stand your ground." Dominique let her eyes wander around the cabin, remembering the little details she'd noticed earlier. The couple in seats 4B and C, who were trying to look like they were reading, but were definitely watching. The older gentleman in 1C, who was making a great show of being absorbed in his newspaper. And then there was the younger flight attendant, a Hispanic woman named Alana, hovering near the galley. You could see the tension around her eyes. She clearly wasn't comfortable with any of this. Not a soul said a word. Nobody stepped in. It felt awfully familiar. Like all those investment meetings where she was the only woman who didn't look like everyone else. Or that time at her own company's party when security asked to see her identification not once, not twice, but 3 times. Her phone buzzed in her purse. It was probably Terrence. He was her chief operating officer, likely with an update on tomorrow's $700 million deal with Atlantic Global Airlines. The very airline she was currently sitting on. You had to appreciate the irony. She could raise her voice, demand to see a supervisor, even pull up her net worth on her phone to prove she could probably buy the plane. But that would just make her into a headline, wouldn't it? The angry woman who causes a scene. So instead, she thought about what real power was. The kind of power that doesn't have to prove anything. "Excuse me," James Walker said, his patience finally wearing thin. "I have a connecting flight to catch in Singapore." A connection. Well, of course he did. Dominique stood up, slowly and deliberately gathering her things. She wasn't rushing. She was simply moving on her own time. "Thank you for your understanding," Veronica said, and you could almost see the tension leave her shoulders. "Premium economy is plenty comfortable on this plane, of course. As if the whole thing was about legroom, and not, the principle of it." Dominique stepped into the aisle. She felt the weight of her choice settle in, right between her shoulder blades. It was a familiar feeling, an old acquaintance from boardrooms and high-stakes meetings. It was there at country clubs and company getaways. That same old question, which hills are worth dying on and which ones are best to walk around. Moving past James Walker, she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something like inevitability. He didn't look at her as he settled into her seat and immediately pushed the button for the flight attendant. Some kinds of power are loud. They barge in and take up all the air in the room. But Dominique, she was familiar with a different sort of strength. The quiet kind. The kind that watches and waits and does not have to shout to be heard. Its actions tend to do all the talking that is needed. She followed Veronica back toward premium economy, the gears already turning in her mind. This was not going to be solved with a loud argument or a scene. No, this would be handled with the quiet, careful precision that made her company, Nexus Systems, the engine that kept this very airline in the sky. And walking away from seat 2A, Dominique was sure of one thing. This little drama was a long way from being over. "I am sorry, but our operational protocols have to come before any single booking." Veronica Miller's tone had that smooth, polished sound of someone who has given bad news for a living. She was standing right there in the aisle, next to seat 2A. She had one hand resting on the headrest, almost like she was saving the spot for James Walker. Dominique felt a little switch flip somewhere deep inside her. It was not anger, not really. It was more like a calm, clear focus. The same kind of clarity that had seen her through 2 major market crashes and more than a few hostile takeover attempts. She took in the scene around her, just observing. "Could you tell me," she asked, "what specific protocol allows you to move someone with a confirmed first-class ticket?" Her voice was even, not looking for a fight, just an answer. For just a heartbeat, Veronica's professional smile wavered. "It is our preferred passenger protocol. It lets us make adjustments to seating for our elite status members." Elite status. The words just kind of hung there in the air, smelling sweet but having no substance. Dominique noticed how Mr. Walker seemed to sit up a little straighter. Hearing that phrase was like getting a gold star, confirming he was indeed a very important person. "I see," Dominique said, and those 2 little words carried a whole lot of weight. "And where might I find this protocol written down?" A young man in a suit a few rows up glanced over, his phone suddenly forgotten. A lady across the aisle fidgeted in her seat. This little show of authority works best when no one asks questions, you see. And Dominique had just asked a big one. For a second, you could see the composure on Veronica's face crack just a little. It is an internal policy, ma'am. If you would please come with me to premium economy. We do need to get ready for departure. Dominique ran through the possibilities in her head. She could make a bigger deal of it, ask for the captain, stand on her rights as a paying passenger. She could even tell them who she was, the chief executive officer of the company that built the very computer systems this airline runs on. Oh, that was a tempting thought, but it was too soon to play that card. She looked over at Walker again. He was in his mid-40s, sharp suit and all. But there was a certain shine to him. The kind you see on someone who worked hard to get where they are, not someone who was just born there, and the way Veronica treated him felt a little more personal than just standard procedure. Your bag, ma'am, Veronica said, pointing up to the leather laptop case in the bin above. The plane had gone quiet. It was that special kind of quiet that happens when a private disagreement goes public. Some folks suddenly found their books very interesting. Others were watching, not even trying to hide it, like it was a free-in-flight movie. Dominique reached up for her bag, taking her sweet time. I just want to be clear, she said. My seat is being changed because of this preferred passenger protocol, and not because of any problem with my ticket. Is that right? It was a sharp question. The kind you ask when you want the answer on the record. And just then, a few little red recording lights started blinking on phones around the cabin. In this day and age of viral videos and instant outrage, a recording is a powerful thing. Veronica hesitated, maybe sensing there was more to my question than met the ear. Like I said before, we have the discretion to, well, optimize the cabin for our most important flyers. Mr. Walker is a regional manager for our airline, and he has the highest possible status. And there it was. Not some official company rule, but a personal favor. The real reason just slipped right out from behind all that corporate talk. That's when James Walker finally decided to speak. His voice had that easy confidence of a man who isn't used to being questioned. Look, he said, I'd rather not make a big deal out of this. I have a red-eye flight to Singapore after we land, and I really need to get some proper rest. The airline is simply looking after its own people, taking care of its own. That phrase echoed in Dominique's mind, clear as a bell. She wondered how many times she'd heard words, just like that, to explain away being left out, to dress up prejudice as just another procedure. Her thoughts drifted to the contract waiting for her tomorrow. A $700 million deal. 3 years of hard work poured into it. It was the crowning achievement of Nexus Systems' expansion into global aviation. And all of it was just waiting on her signature, tomorrow morning, in Seattle. Of course, Dominique said after a moment, I certainly wouldn't want to hold up the flight. You could see the relief wash over Veronica's face. It was so obvious. She'd clearly been bracing for a scene and had probably dealt with her share of passengers who wouldn't move so easily. As Dominique turned to let Veronica lead her toward premium economy, you could almost feel it in the air. This well-dressed black woman just going along with it, defying some kind of silent expectation. That's when she noticed Elena Rodriguez, the younger flight attendant, watching from near the galley. The look on her face was something awfully close to an apology. That walk through business class and into premium economy felt a whole lot longer than it actually was. Dominique could feel the whole atmosphere of the cabin shift around her. The seats were a little closer, the lighting was a shade less soft, and you were suddenly a lot more aware of the people sitting near you. It wasn't uncomfortable, not by any normal standard, but it was a definite step down from the private suite she had paid for. Here you are, 5C, Veronica said, gesturing to a seat on the aisle. "I'll have your pre-departure drink brought right over," as if a glass of champagne could rinse away the disrespect. Dominique settled into her seat, tucking her purse under the one in front of her. She didn't grab for her phone right away. She didn't react at all. Instead, she just sat there, perfectly still, letting the full texture of the moment sink in. Around her, the other passengers in premium economy were all doing a very good job of pretending not to notice her arrival. This woman in an expensive dress who had clearly been moved from the front of the plane. A man in a suit across the aisle shot a quick look her way, then looked away just as fast, a little flicker of discomfort on his face. A mother with a little girl leaned in and whispered something, her eyes darting over to Dominique and back again. Veronica lingered for a second, maybe waiting for one last complaint. When Dominique offered nothing, Veronica retreated back toward first class, her shoulders visibly relaxing with every step she took. It was only then that Dominique took one single, deep breath. It was not a sigh of giving up, though. It was a breath of decision. Power wasn't always about the immediate reaction, after all. Sometimes it was about the calculated response. She reached for her phone. "Here is your sparkling water, miss." The flight attendant paused, giving an awkward glance at the seating chart on her tablet. "It's Reynolds. Dominique Reynolds." She took the plastic cup, thinking how different it was from the heavy crystal glass she'd been holding. The one she'd been offered in first class not even 20 minutes ago. The difference was not just in the material, but in the subtle little message that came with it. "You are worth less back here." From her new spot in seat 5C, Dominique could just see the edge of first class through the dividing curtain. James Walker was already reclining. He had a glass of champagne in his hand, casually scrolling through his phone with the relaxed air of a man who had never once had to question if a space would make room for him. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" the attendant asked, her tone making it clear she was ready to be anywhere else. "No, thank you." Dominique's voice was perfectly even, giving no hint of the chess match playing out in her mind. As the attendant hurried off, Dominique took a slow look around at her new surroundings. Premium economy on one of Atlantic Global's Boeing 787s is nothing to sneeze at, really. The seats are wider than in the back, the legroom is decent, and the amenities are fine. But the symbolism of being moved? Well, that stung in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with physical comfort. Across the aisle, a white businessman in his early 50s kept sneaking glances at her. You could tell from the tag on his carry, on that his name was Michael Thompson. He had that slightly rumpled look of a man who was just about done with a long business trip. He had a look on his face that was part curiosity, part discomfort. You know the look, when someone sees something they know is not quite right, but they cannot put their finger on it. A couple of rows up, there was a Hispanic woman, maybe in her mid-30s, with a sleeping child next to her. The little one looked to be about 7 years old. Dominique heard another passenger call her Sofia Alvarez. It was clear she had noticed the whole seat, switching business too. Their eyes met for just a second as Dominique got settled into seat 5C. It was just a quick flash of recognition between them. That quiet little nod that people give each other when they have been on the receiving end of these kinds of small slights before. From the aisle, a quiet voice said, "Excuse me." Dominique turned, and there was the younger flight attendant. Her name tag read Elena Rodriguez, and unlike Veronica's polished, corporate smile, Elena's expression looked genuinely sorry. "I brought you this," she said, very discreetly handing Dominique a premium amenity kit. It was not the fancy one from first class, mind you, but it was a step up from the standard one they gave out in premium economy. "I am sorry about the adjustment," she said. The way she put just a little stress on that last word said everything. Yes, this definitely was not standard procedure. This was something else altogether. Thank you, Elena, Dominique said, giving her a small nod. As Elena walked off down the aisle, Dominique caught sight of a young white fellow in his late 20s, a few rows back. He had his phone angled right in her direction. She would find out later his name was Ryan Cooper, a tech guy who knew exactly who she was the moment he saw her. But unlike everyone else who was just watching, he was doing something more. He was making a record of it all. Dominique shifted her focus back to her own phone, opening up her secure messaging application. That buzz she had felt in her pocket earlier. It was, just as she thought, a message from Terrence Williams, her chief operating officer. It read, "Final contract edits are all done. Bradford's team sounds eager to sign tomorrow. We are looking at $700 million over 3 years, plus maintenance options. Let me know when you land." That message certainly hit a little differently now. Atlantic Global Airlines, the same company that had just booted her from a seat she paid for, was about to sign a massive contract with her company, Nexus Systems, tomorrow morning. The deal would have Nexus's digital systems completely overhaul their infrastructure. We are talking everything from ticketing to crew schedules, maintenance tracking to managing customer data. $700 million. It was the biggest contract in the history of Nexus Systems, and they had just treated its chief executive officer like she was some kind of bother. The irony was almost funny. And Dominique did not miss the opportunity that came with it, either. She looked back toward first class. Through that little gap in the curtain, she could see Veronica laughing at something James Walker had just said. Her whole professional mask just seemed to melt away into something a bit more casual. The champagne was definitely flowing up there. And Mr. Walker, he looked right at home in a seat that was not his, enjoying all the perks that should have been for someone else. And just behind her, Ryan Cooper still had his phone up, capturing the whole two-tiered show. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Andrew Ramirez. We are currently number 4 for departure, and we should be in the air in about 15 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure." As his voice clicked off, Dominique felt that old, familiar weight of a big decision settle right in her chest. It was the same feeling she had had when she walked away from a safe job to start Nexus with little more than an idea and a whole lot of grit. The very same feeling she had had when she turned down a buyout offer. An offer that would have made her rich, sure, but it would have torn apart the company she had worked so hard to build. Her grandmother came to mind again. Eloise Reynolds. For 30 years, she had cleaned office buildings at night. She spent her time in spaces where she would never have been welcome in the light of day. She used to tell Dominique, "Remember, sometimes power is not loud. Sometimes it is just knowing which switch turns on all the lights." Dominique glanced down at her phone again, then up at the lit, "Fasten seat belt" sign, and in her mind's eye, she could already see the digital skeleton of Atlantic Global's whole operation. That complicated web of systems her team at Nexus had mapped out while getting the contract ready. Systems that would very soon be under her company's control. Systems that, if she wanted, she could get into right now with the right commands. And then, she thought about dignity. It was about the principal, and about all the others who had been moved aside, looked over, and made to feel small without the kind of influence she now held. Her burgundy, painted nail hovered just above the screen of her phone. Just one message. That was all it would take to set things in motion. "Did you see what happened?" The question, a hushed whisper, came from the young man sitting in 6D, who was leaning forward to speak to his seatmate. That woman, the one in the burgundy dress, She got moved out of first class for that fellow in the grey suit. Dominique didn't turn her head, but she could hear their conversation as clear as day. The cabin had settled into that familiar hum before a flight, with flight attendants doing their final checks and closing the overhead bins. You could hear the distant rumble of the engines, getting ready. It was the perfect cover for a little airplane chatter. She didn't look too pleased. His companion answered. "I would have raised a fuss." "Oh, you would have?" Dominique thought to herself. But that, right there, was the difference. That was always the difference, wasn't it? The luxury of getting to show your anger wasn't something everyone was afforded. She remembered a board meeting about 3 years ago, with an investor named Martin Gladwell. He had kept directing his questions to Terence instead of her, even though she was the chief executive officer. She didn't make a scene in the middle of the meeting. Instead, she just carefully noted the pattern and later presented it privately to the chairman of the board. The result was Mr. Gladwell's quiet removal from the investment committee. It was calculated, it was precise, and it was effective. Her phone buzzed in her hand again. This time it was Alicia, her executive assistant. The hotel was confirmed. A car service was waiting in Seattle. The meeting with Bradford was scheduled for 9 in the morning at their headquarters. The legal team was on standby for the signatures. Everything was going just as planned, except for this little hiccup. Dominique closed her eyes for a second, letting a memory she rarely visited come to the surface. She was 24 years old, freshly promoted to lead developer at a company called Tech Fusion. It was the company holiday party at a fancy restaurant, and the host had stopped her right at the door to ask if she was looking for the service entrance. She could still feel the heat of that humiliation in her chest as her colleagues just watched. Her manager finally stepped in, looking embarrassed, but certainly not outraged on her behalf. She had smiled right through it, gone on with her evening as if nothing was wrong, and even accepted the host's awkward apology. But the very next day, she started updating her resume. 6 months after that night, the first seeds of what would eventually become Nexus Systems were planted. That evening had taught her a very important lesson. A direct confrontation might feel good for a moment, but a well-thought-out, strategic response is what creates real, lasting change. The plane gave a little jolt as it started to push back from the gate. The safety demonstration began, the flight attendants moving through their familiar, choreographed routine with a well-practiced grace. Elena Rodriguez was demonstrating how the oxygen masks worked near the front of the premium economy section, and her eyes met Dominique's for just a second as she went by. Across the aisle, Michael Thompson was watching her now, and he wasn't trying to hide his curiosity. He had obviously heard the gossip. His face had that particular look of discomfort people get when they see something unfair, but have absolutely no idea what their part is in fixing it. Dominique's mind, meanwhile, was still running the numbers, weighing the options. The preferred passenger rule that Veronica had mentioned was almost certainly made up, or at the very least, applied very selectively. Sure, James Walker might be a regional manager, he might even have some special status, but company policy doesn't just bump a confirmed first-class passenger for an airline employee, not unless it's a real operational emergency. No. This was someone's personal preference being disguised as a corporate rule, the oldest trick in the book in these kinds of professional settings, and it had been done without a moment's hesitation, with the calm, quiet confidence that there wouldn't be any real consequences. The plane started moving toward the runway, the sound of the engines growing louder, more urgent. Dominique could feel the weight of her phone in her hand, a small device that held the power to take action, resting right there in her palm. She thought about the contract one more time. $700 million. It was a deal that would completely transform both Nexus and Atlantic Global. It was the result of years of hard work, development, and negotiation. Was she really thinking about putting all that at risk over a seat assignment? No, it was never about the seat. It was about the principle of it, about the casual way they assumed her dignity was something they could bargain with. It was about that unspoken idea that she should just accept being moved, being made smaller, being dismissed, as if that was simply the price she had to pay to move through the world, looking the way she did. Her grandmother's voice came back to her then, clear as ever. Don't you ever confuse making peace with surrendering your ground. The aircraft came to a stop at the edge of the runway. They were at the threshold, the engines humming a low tune as they waited for the go-ahead. That final moment you're still tied to the earth before you give yourself over to the sky, and that's when Dominique made her decision. With no hesitation, she opened a secure messaging application on her tablet and chose a contact labeled Operations Team Alpha. Her fingers tapped out a message that would have looked like nothing special to anyone peeking over her shoulder. Initiate Protocol 5 verification on Atlantic Global integration. Full system diagnostic. Priority override authorization Dr. Alpha 9721. Honestly, it just looked like some boring, everyday bit of corporate business. But for the people on the receiving end, the elite operations team at Nexus Systems, that message meant something completely different. It was like a key turning in a very, very specific lock. She hit send right as the engines roared to life, the plane pushing her back into her seat as it raced down the runway. That digital message traveled a whole lot faster than the airplane, arriving at its destination before the wheels had even lifted off the pavement. And as the plane climbed into the evening air, tilting gently over the sparkling grid of city lights below, Dominique felt a strange quietness settle over her. It was not the feeling of someone who had given up. It was the patience of someone who has just wound up a very powerful clock and is waiting for it to strike. Inside the humming cabin of the climbing plane, surrounded by all the folks who saw her get moved, but had no idea what she had just done about it, Dominique Reynolds simply waited. The first move had been made, and nobody else on that plane, not James Walker sipping her champagne up in seat 2A, not Veronica Miller with her special passenger status, not even Captain Ramirez up in the cockpit, had the faintest clue what was coming. You see, power does not always have to shout. Sometimes it just moves quietly in the background, gaining steam until you cannot ignore it anymore. Sometimes it is as simple as knowing which switch turns on the lights and which one turns them off. What in the world do you mean the system is locked? Jessica Lawson, the chief digital officer for Atlantic Global Airlines, could hardly believe what she was seeing on her screen. Her dashboard, which was usually a comforting wall of green lights, had suddenly become a sea of angry yellow alerts, with more than a few critical systems blinking a very unhappy shade of red. Thousands of feet below Flight 372, back in Atlantic Global's operations hub just outside of Boston, the first little waves from Dominique's message were starting to hit the shore. It looks like a security protocol has been activated. Taylor Morrison, the systems administrator on the night shift, explained. The verification process is demanding an executive sign-off for everything. Scheduling, bookings, even financial approvals. Well, override it. Jessica snapped, the harsh office lights making the stress on her face look even deeper. I cannot. Taylor replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. It is coming straight from the Nexus integration layer. We do not have the keys to that part of the system yet. And just like that, a cold knot formed in Jessica's stomach. The Nexus integration, the very same system they were supposed to finalize the contract for tomorrow, had somehow put their entire operation on lockdown. Since they could not get into Nexus's proprietary protocols, they were pretty much locked out of their own house. "Get Bradford on the phone now," she ordered, talking about Atlantic Global's chief executive officer. "And somebody find out who at Nexus can shut this thing down." All the while 5,000 feet over Pennsylvania, Flight 372 just kept flying west. The passengers had no idea a digital hurricane was brewing on the ground. And there in seat 5C, Dominique Reynolds looked like she was just quietly working away on her tablet. Her expression gave away nothing of the carefully planned response she had just launched. Oh, she knew exactly what was happening down there. Protocol 5 was a full-blown security check, a feature originally designed to stop unauthorized folks from getting in, a complete system diagnostic that basically paused all operations until an executive gave the okay. Now, it was a perfectly legitimate tool, made for perfectly legitimate reasons. But used this way, it was something else entirely. It was a digital freeze, frame for Atlantic Global's whole operation. It was not permanent, and it was not going to break anything. But it was immediate, and it was designed to get their attention. It was like flipping the main breaker to remind everyone who really controlled the lights. Dominique glanced at her watch. It had been 3 minutes since the protocol was activated. By now, the operations centers in Boston, Chicago, and Dallas would all be staring at those flashing alerts. In about 5 minutes, they would trace the authorization code back to her, and in 10, well, that is when things would get really interesting. They'd be trying to reach her soon, but she wasn't about to take their calls. Not just yet. Near the front of the plane, Elena Rodriguez stepped out from the first-class cabin. A small frown line had formed on her forehead as she spoke in low tones with another flight attendant. Something was definitely up. Dominique simply turned her attention back to her tablet, looking over tomorrow's contract points with that quiet, focused calm that was her signature in the business world. $700 million over the course of 3 years. A complete digital reinvention of Atlantic Global's customer systems, weaving in Nexus's own unique scheduling software. A partnership that was supposed to redefine the airline's future. And all of it, right now, was hanging by a digital thread that she alone was holding. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Doctor. This is Thomas Bradford, Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Global. We have an urgent situation with the Nexus integration. Please call me immediately at this number." She read it once, then a second time, before setting the phone aside without a word. Thomas Bradford, the man she was scheduled to meet tomorrow to sign that historic contract, was now reaching out to her himself, skipping all the usual channels. Good. The message had landed, but she wasn't ready to talk. Not until the full effect had settled in. Up in the cockpit, Captain Andrew Ramirez was getting his first sign that something out of the ordinary was going on. The flight management system was working just fine. The flight controls, navigation, all the safety systems were running like a top. Those were entirely separate from the airline's business operations, but a message had just blinked onto his communications display. It read, "Notice Atlantic Global. Operational systems under security review. Ground operations temporarily restricted. Maintain normal flight procedures. We will advise." Ramirez gave his first officer a puzzled look. "Ever seen that before?" "Never," the first officer replied, squinting at the message. "Could be a drill from the information technology folks. Let me check with dispatch." As they tried to get some clarity, the first real effects were starting to ripple out. You could see it all across Atlantic Global's network. At the John F. Kennedy gate, agents found they couldn't process boarding passes for the next wave of flights. In Chicago, the baggage systems had to be operated by hand. In Dallas, the crew scheduling software just froze in the middle of an assignment. The whole airline, The entire technological world that kept the planes moving, the passengers flowing, and the whole operation running, was experiencing what you might call a controlled pause. It wasn't a crash, not a disaster, but a simple demonstration of how vulnerable things were. Back on Flight 370, the cabin intercom chimed to life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Veronica Miller's voice came over the speaker. "This is your lead flight attendant. We've been advised by our dispatch that there will be a brief update to our arrival information once we're closer to Seattle. In the meantime, please enjoy your flight. We'll begin beverage service momentarily." The carefully chosen words didn't reveal a thing, but Dominique could feel the tension just beneath the surface. They knew something was happening, but they didn't have a clue what or why. Her phone lit up again, this time with a whole flood of notifications. 3 missed calls from Thomas Bradford, 5 messages from Terrence Williams, and an urgent email from Atlantic Global's legal department. She just silenced the phone and slipped it into her purse. They would have to wait. All of them would wait until she was good and ready to talk. In first class, James Walker didn't have a care in the world. Now enjoying what should have been her dinner, a perk he had taken without a second thought, he was still wrapped up in its comfortable bubble. Across the aisle, Michael Thompson was watching Dominique with a growing curiosity. "Excuse me," he finally said, leaning toward her just a little. "I couldn't help but notice what happened earlier. That was completely inappropriate. Are you going to file a complaint?" Dominique offered him a small, measured smile. "I believe the situation is already being addressed." Thompson nodded, though you could tell he wasn't satisfied with that answer. But he wasn't about to press his luck. He couldn't possibly know that the complaint was already echoing through every corner of Atlantic Global's system, or that, addressing it, was happening on a scale he could never imagine. Just then, the beverage service began in premium economy. Dominique took the glass of wine offered by Elena, the flight attendant, who seemed to hang around for just a beat too long. "Miss Reynolds," she said, her voice low. "The captain was wondering if you might have a moment to speak with him at your convenience." And there it was. It had begun. They knew who she was. They had finally connected the dots between the woman they'd moved out of first class and the CEO whose company now had their entire airline in a digital chokehold. "Of course," Dominique replied, her voice calm. "After the beverage service will be just fine." Elena just nodded and moved down the aisle, but the message was crystal clear. The whole power dynamic on that plane had just flipped. The very woman they had so casually displaced was now being approached with a quiet deference. Not because she'd caused a scene, and not because she'd asked for any special treatment. No, it was because she had shown them, with silent, simple precision, exactly who was holding all the cards. As the jet flew west into the darkening sky, Dominique just sipped her wine and she waited. It was their turn to make a move. All of our flights are showing delayed. Every single one of them. You could hear the strained disbelief in Thomas Bradford's voice, the sound of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. The Atlantic Global CEO was standing right in the middle of his emergency operations room, surrounded by giant screens all blinking with cascading yellow and red alerts. "They are not delayed, sir. They're being held for security verification." Jessica Lawson corrected him, her fingers a blur across the keyboard. "The system is demanding an executive authentication for every single departure." It hasn't crashed. It's actually doing exactly what it was designed to do when this particular security protocol is activated. Which protocol? Protocol 5. It is a part of that new Nexus integration we have been rolling out. Bradford's face clouded over. And who exactly authorized this activation? Jessica paused for a moment before she answered. The authorization code is DR Alpha 9721. DR. That would be Dominique Reynolds, the CEO of Nexus Systems. Reynolds, Bradford echoed, the confusion plain on his face. Why on earth would she do this the night before we sign the contract? Get her on the phone. We are trying, sir. She isn't answering. Our system shows she is currently on Flight 372, on its way to Seattle. Bradford just stared at his chief digital officer. She's on one of our planes, right now. Yes, sir. Boston to Seattle. It's scheduled to land at 11:40, 2 at night, local time. I want to talk to the captain of that flight. And I mean right now. While things were getting heated at headquarters, the ripple effects were spreading across the entire Atlantic global network. Over at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the 7:15 in the evening flight to London was all boarded and sitting at the gate. Its passengers starting to get a little restless. Ladies and gentlemen, the gate agent announced, trying her best to smile through the stress. We seem to be experiencing just a brief system verification delay. We should have a new update for you in just a few minutes. A man who looked like an executive, sitting in seat 2C, raised his hand. My flight tracker app says all of your flights are delayed. So, what's really going on? The question just hung there in the tense air as dozens of other people pulled out their phones to see for themselves. And sure enough, there it was. That familiar, angry red delayed. Notice next to every single Atlantic global flight listed anywhere in the country. Is this a system-wide outage? Someone else shouted from the back. It's not an outage, the gate agent said, choosing her words very, very carefully. It's a scheduled security verification. We do apologize for the inconvenience. But it was much more than just one flight. In airport terminals all across the nation, this exact same scene was playing out as the whole airline ground to a very controlled and very complete stop. No more planes could be boarded. No baggage could be automatically processed. No flight crews could be reassigned. The entire airline, one of the biggest in the world, had been put on an indefinite pause. Back on Flight 372, Captain Andrew Ramirez got a priority message from Atlantic Global Headquarters. The message was short, but it was unlike any he had ever seen. Captain Ramirez, this is CEO Bradford. We have reason to believe a passenger. Dominique Reynolds, in premium economy, has initiated a network-wide security protocol. You are to approach her with respect and diplomacy. Request that she contact me as soon as possible. This is a critical situation. Authorization Bradford Exec 1. Ramirez read the message a second time, then just looked over at his first officer. Did we seriously just get an order to go talk to a passenger about a network security problem? The first officer asked, completely bewildered. Apparently so, Ramirez said, just as puzzled. And this was not just any passenger you see. It had to be someone important if Bradford himself was getting involved. Back in the premium economy cabin, Dominique kept right on working on her tablet, looking as cool as a cucumber, despite the little hurricane she had just set in motion. She hadn't answered a single one of the messages that were now piling up on her phone. Let them all wait. Let them get a taste of what it felt like to have control yanked away from you, to have the rulebook quoted at you when you had no way to fight back. Just across the aisle, Michael Thompson kept shooting glances her way. It was pretty clear he could tell something out of the ordinary was happening. A couple of rows ahead of them, Sophia Alvarez had also noticed things were a little off. The flight attendants were moving with a bit more purpose, having quiet talks near the galley. Up in first class, James Walker was in his own little world, completely shielded from the rising tension. He was kicked back with his noise-cancelling headphones on, the very picture of unbothered comfort. Veronica Miller was tending to him with that polished, deferential manner, freshening up his drink without even being asked. The difference was not lost on Alina Rodriguez. who was moving through the premium economy section with a growing sense of the power dynamics shifting right there on the plane. As she passed by Dominique's seat, she leaned down just a bit. "The captain would like to have a word with you when you have a moment," she said in a low voice. I mentioned it was about an operational matter. Dominique simply nodded. "I will be available as soon as I finish this document." Elena paused, then added, "It seems we are having some sort of issue with our systems on the ground. Several of my colleagues have messaged me about delays across the whole network." "Is that so?" Dominique replied, her face a perfect mask of neutrality. "I do hope it gets resolved soon." As Elena moved on, Dominique allowed herself a small, private moment of satisfaction. The message was being delivered loud and clear. Now it was time for the next step. She picked up her phone and, for the first time since takeoff, began to type a response to Thomas Bradford. "Mr. Bradford, I understand there is a situation with the Nexus integration. I would be happy to discuss it once I have been returned to my rightful seat, 2A, which, I might add, I reserved and paid for. Operational protocols ought to apply equally to all passengers, regardless of who they know within the airline. Regards, Dominique Reynolds, Chief Executive Officer of Nexus Systems." She hit send, then watched as the message status flipped to delivered, and then, a heartbeat later, to read. Just as she'd figured, Bradford was waiting by his phone. The reply came back in less than 30 seconds. "Miss Reynolds, I apologize for any inconvenience. I have instructed the captain to address your seating situation immediately. The security protocol is affecting thousands of passengers. Please call me as soon as you can to discuss a resolution." Dominique read the message but did not reply. Instead, she just closed her eyes for a second, thinking about her next move in this high-stakes game of chess. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Ramirez got another urgent message. This one left absolutely no room for misunderstanding. "Captain Ramirez from Chief Executive Officer Bradford. Priority instruction. Passenger Reynolds is to be immediately returned to her original first-class seat assignment, and the current occupant is to be relocated. Handle this with the utmost courtesy. The network situation is directly connected to this matter. Authorization Bradford XC1. Ramirez unbuckled his harness. "You take the controls," he told his first officer. "I need to go handle this personally." As he stepped out of the cockpit, Dominique's phone lit up with yet another message from Bradford. "The captain has been instructed to correct your seating assignment immediately. Please contact me once this is addressed." And for the first time since she had boarded this plane, Dominique felt the balance of power shift for good, not because of a confrontation, or because she made demands, or because of some emotional appeal, but because of the quiet, firm application of leverage. Right on the most sensitive spot, she tucked her tablet into her bag and simply waited. Knowing that the next few moments would tell her everything she needed to know about how seriously Atlantic Global was taking things. The captain himself was about to make an appearance, and James Walker was about to learn a very useful lesson about the real meaning of preferred passenger protocol. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The intercom crackled, and you could see everyone's eyes drift up toward the ceiling speakers. Captain Andrew Ramirez's voice had that practiced calm of a man who'd spent thousands of hours in the air. But there was a little something underneath it, an edge of tension that experienced flyers could spot from a mile away. "We're currently cruising at 38,000 feet with some good winds on our tail. Looks like our flight time is holding steady at about 5 hours and 20 minutes. He took a breath, and in that little bit of quiet, Dominique could feel him choosing his next words very carefully. "However, I have been advised of a seating assignment issue that requires our immediate attention. Our cabin crew will be making a necessary adjustment momentarily. We certainly appreciate your patience and understanding." And just like that, the announcement was over, leaving a little ripple of whispers behind it. You could see passengers starting to trade curious looks. A lot of them were glancing back toward premium economy, right where Dominique was sitting. She just sat there, her posture giving nothing away about the little chess move she had just made. Then, Captain Ramirez himself appeared at the front of the premium economy section, his tall frame commanding attention right away. This was not your typical pilot's visit to say hello. You could tell he was there for a reason. He had a quick, quiet word with Elena Rodriguez, who just nodded and then gestured, ever so slightly, toward Dominique. As the captain made his way over, Dominique noticed a few phones popping up here and there, discreetly recording the moment. After all, a uniformed pilot having a personal chat with a passenger mid-flight was something you did not see every day. "Miss Reynolds," Captain Ramirez said, his voice formal but respectful. "Yes, Captain." She met his gaze without blinking. "Would you please come with me? I would like to speak with you privately." Dominique gathered her things and followed him to that little galley area between premium economy and business class. Once they were out of earshot, Ramirez lowered his voice. "Miss Reynolds, I have received direct instructions from Chief Executive Officer Bradford regarding your seating assignment. I understand you were originally seated in 2A. That is correct. May I ask what happened?" Dominique had to give him credit for his approach, not assuming, not dismissing, just asking. "I was informed by your lead flight attendant that my confirmed first-class seat was being reassigned to Mr. Walker, due to what she described as a preferred passenger protocol. I was told he has priority as a regional manager with the airline." The captain's jaw tightened just a little. "I see. And this led to your response." The careful way he said it told Dominique that he knew exactly who she was and what she had done. But he was navigating the situation with all the proper caution. "Captain, I am the Chief Executive Officer of Nexus Systems. Tomorrow morning, I am scheduled to sign a $700 million contract integrating our technologies with Atlantic Global's operations. The systems currently undergoing security verification are the very same systems your airline is planning to adopt." You could almost see the understanding dawn in his eyes. "And the current verification protocol was authorized by me." "Yes. It is a standard security measure designed to protect sensitive operations during potential integrity breaches." All that diplomatic language did not quite hide the reality of the situation. She had just demonstrated her company's control over Atlantic Global's entire digital infrastructure, all in response to being moved from her seat. Ramirez processed this information with the calm assessment of someone who is well accustomed to managing complicated situations. "Miss Reynolds, I apologize for the way you were treated. I have been instructed to return you to your original seat immediately. Will this address your immediate concern?" She considered it for a moment. "It would be a start, Captain." He gave a slight nod, understanding what she meant. The seat was just the symptom, the visible part of a much deeper problem about respect, policy, and treating people right. "If you will follow me, I will personally escort you back to first class." They moved back through the business class cabin, with the eyes of every curious passenger following their every step. As they approached the first class curtain, Veronica Miller noticed them coming, and that practiced smile of hers just seemed to freeze right on her face. "Veronica," Captain Ramirez said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Miss Reynolds will be returning to her original seat in 2A. Please assist Mr. Walker with relocating to another available seat." Veronica's composure slipped for just a second. "Captain, I am not sure that is," he interrupted her, saying this comes directly from Chief Executive Officer Bradford. His voice, quiet but firm as a rock. It is not a request. In seat 2A, James Walker looked up from his movie, irritation flashing across his face, as he finally noticed the captain standing there next to his seat, along with Dominique. "What is going on here?" he asked, pulling off his headphones. "Mr. Walker," Captain Ramirez started, his voice calm. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding with the seat assignments. This seat was originally confirmed for Miss Reynolds. I'm going to have to ask you to relocate." Walker's face turned a bit red. "That's ridiculous. I'm a regional manager, and I have elite status." Veronica already went over the protocol with this woman. That phrase, "this woman," just sort of hung there in the quiet cabin, a perfect summary of what had happened before. Dominique didn't say a word, just let the captain do his job. You see, her real power was not in arguing right here. It was in the thousands of passengers stuck on the ground all across the country, and the millions of dollars in delays piling up every single minute, not to mention that $700 million contract that was now teetering on the edge. Ramirez just kept on, his voice steady. "Mr. Walker, this order comes straight from our CEO, Mr. Bradford. Miss Reynolds needs to be put back in her original seat right away. There's a much bigger operational issue at play that makes this necessary." Hearing the name Bradford, who was Walker's big boss, you could just see the wheels turning in his head. His face went from angry to just plain confused. Bradford himself. "What kind of operational situation? I'm not free to get into the details, sir. But it is a top priority issue that is affecting our whole network." The other folks in first class were now watching this little show with great interest. Walker glanced from the captain over to Dominique, taking a second look at the woman he had so easily dismissed just a little while ago. "Who are you, exactly?" he asked, his arrogance giving way to suspicion. But before Dominique even had a chance to answer, Elena Rodriguez appeared at their side. "Mr. Walker, we have a seat ready for you in business class, seat 8C. I can help you with your things." Walker paused for a moment, clearly running the numbers in his head, before realizing he did not have any options left. You could see he was not happy about it, but he started gathering his things and stood up. "This is highly irregular," he mumbled, making sure not to look at Dominique. As he shuffled past her on his way to business class, Dominique could not help but notice the perfect flip of their first meeting. Now it was Walker being moved. Walker being sent somewhere else. Walker getting a taste of that uncomfortable feeling when your plans are suddenly turned upside down. The only difference, of course, was that his move came with an explanation, the personal attention of the captain, and a new seat that was still plenty comfortable. All the little courtesies she had not been offered. "Your seat, Miss Reynolds," Captain Ramirez said with a gesture towards seat 2A. As Dominique settled back where she belonged, she could feel everyone in first class looking at her. She was not the woman who got pushed aside anymore. Now, she was the woman who had the captain's full attention, the one who made a regional manager move, the one who set off some kind of mysterious, operational problem big enough for the CEO himself to get involved. "Is there anything else I can get for you right now?" Ramirez asked her. "Just a moment to make a private call, if that is all right." He nodded. "Of course." She then looked him right in the eye and said, "And about that system verification. I will handle that after I've spoken with Mr. Bradford." As the captain headed back to the cockpit, Veronica Miller walked up, looking more than a little nervous. "Miss Reynolds, could I offer you a drink before dinner? Champagne, perhaps." The very same champagne she had been offered, then unoffered, was now back on the table, as if that whole business of being moved had never even happened. "Water will be fine, thank you," Dominique said. Her voice was level, but it carried a certain weight. Once Veronica had scurried away, Dominique finally picked up her phone. 16 missed calls, 27 text messages, and 39 emails had piled up, all of them about the little digital freeze she had started. She opened up her message chain with Thomas Bradford and began to type. Mr. Bradford, I am back in my original seat. I am ready to talk about the system verification protocol. But I want you to know that this situation happened because of a pattern of behavior, not just a one-time thing. When we talk, I want to discuss fixing this right now, but also the deeper cultural problems this whole thing has brought to light. The reply came back almost instantly. Thank you, Miss Reynolds. I am ready to discuss both. Please give me a call as soon as you can. The verification protocol is affecting thousands of passengers and millions of dollars in revenue with every minute that ticked by. Dominique allowed herself a small smile at their rather obvious attempt to overwhelm her with big numbers. Of course, she knew the impact. That was the whole point of her little demonstration. She tapped Bradford's number on her phone, knowing this next conversation was going to change more than just her travel plans for the day. It was going to redefine the entire partnership between Nexus Systems and Atlantic Global Airlines. The real discussion was just getting started. I heard she's the one who runs their whole computer network. The whisper floated over from seat 3B, where a businessman in a tailored suit was leaning over to his travel companion. Sent one little message from her phone and brought the whole airline to a screeching halt. Now, how would you know that? His friend replied, sounding a bit doubtful. My brother works over at O'Hare. He says every single Atlantic Global plane is stuck on the ground for a system verification, whatever in the world that is. And those whispers weren't just up in first class. All through the plane, the strange turn of events was cooking up a whole batch of different theories. First, the captain himself walking a passenger up from premium economy. Then the regional manager getting moved so suddenly. And that vague, operational situation the captain had mentioned over the intercom. Back in the rear galley, Elena Rodriguez stole a moment to check her phone. The online message board for the crew was just lighting up. There were updates pouring in from her colleagues all over. Orlando to London Heathrow sitting at the gate for 45 minutes. Passengers are getting ugly. John F. Kennedy is total chaos. Can't even issue boarding passes. They're doing everything by hand. Dallas-Fort Worth is calling in supervisors. Every flight is showing a security hold. Elena just scrolled through it all. The scale of the problem slowly dawning on her. Whatever was going on, it was much bigger than just Flight 372. Something had pressed a giant pause button on the entire network. And somehow, the woman sitting up in seat 2A, the one who had been so easily dismissed and then brought back with such incredible urgency, was right in the middle of it all. Elena started making her way up the aisle through premium economy, where folks were no longer whispering but talking about it all quite openly. Ryan Cooper, that tech guy who had been filming things earlier, was showing his phone to the people around him. Take a look at this, he was saying. Every last Atlantic Global flight is showing a delay. Something huge is going down. As Elena neared business class, she saw James Walker deep in a very tense phone call. His face was red, a mix of anger and maybe embarrassment. He cupped his hand over the phone when he saw her coming. I need to talk to the captain, he said, his voice tight. Right now? I am sorry, Mr. Walker, but the captain is not available at the moment. Elena answered, her own voice calm and steady. Is there something I can help you with? Do you have any clue who that woman is? The one you just put in my seat. That little phrase, my seat, hung in the air. Elena noticed it right away. Even now, his sense of entitlement was holding strong. Sir, she was simply moved back to her assigned seat. Elena corrected him. And yes, we are aware of who Miss Reynolds is. Walker's face changed. Well, I was just told that she's the chief executive officer of Nexus Systems. Do you even get what that means? They run our entire digital backbone. This system verification, that's hitting every single flight. That is all her. Elena kept her professional mask perfectly in place, but inside, all the puzzle pieces were snapping together. The casual dismissal of an executive, a woman of color, the massive system-wide response, the captain's frantic intervention, a complete and total reversal of fortune. I certainly understand your concern, Mr. Walker. Could I get you something to drink while you're waiting? He just glared at her, knowing full well she was changing the subject. This is going to be a public relations nightmare, he grumbled, turning his attention back to his phone. As Alina moved on toward the front of the cabin, she found herself quietly admiring the elegant way Dominique Reynolds had handled things. There was no yelling, no big scene, no asking to speak to the manager. It was just a quiet, clean demonstration of power applied to the one spot where it would hurt the most. Up in seat 2A, Dominique was just finishing her call with Thomas Bradford. It had been a short call, but a good one. Expectations were set, both for getting things running again and for a meeting they'd be having tomorrow. Miss Reynolds, Alina said, arriving with a fresh glass of water. Is there anything else I can get for you? Dominique glanced up, and you could see her notice the little change in Elena's eyes, a new kind of respect there. No? Thank you, Elena. This is just fine. Elena paused for a second, then leaned in a little, lowering her voice. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened before. That felt different. It was a simple, personal acknowledgement, not some corporate script, and Dominique really took it in. Thank you. I appreciate that. As Alina walked away, Dominique happened to glance toward the galley and saw Veronica Miller watching her. The confidence she had earlier was gone, replaced by a look of pure anxiety. The entire balance of power on the plane had flipped, and you could feel everyone in the cabin slowly figuring out how and why. Down near the back of the aircraft, a man named Ryan Cooper was doing a bit more than just checking on flight delays. Having a background in technology, he had put 2 and 2 together a lot faster than most. He'd started a thread on Twitter, and it was already catching fire. It went something like this. Witnessing something incredible on Hatchard Atlantic Global Flight 372, a black female executive was moved from first class for an airline manager. Now, every single Atlantic Global flight in the country is grounded after she made one phone call. The captain just personally escorted her back to her original seat. 17. The story was already leaving the airplane, spreading out into the terminals, where other passengers were waiting for their own delayed flights, and even into the operation centers where technicians were scrambling over this so-called verification protocol. It was becoming a real time lesson in power, respect, and consequences. Over in premium economy, Sofia Alvarez had been watching all of this unfold with a great deal of interest. As a mid-level human resources director for a retail company, she had seen similar things play out at the office. The casual way women of color were sometimes dismissed, the unwritten rules that always seemed to apply differently depending on who you were. But she had almost never seen such a swift and direct response, such a perfect display of leverage. She leaned over to her seatmate. That woman they just moved back to first class. I think she's the reason every Atlantic Global flight is on the ground right now. Seriously, how do you know? My cousin works the gate in Seattle, she replied. Says the whole system is demanding an executive verification for every single flight. Nothing can take off without a manual approval. That little bit of information started to move through the cabin, from one person to the next, by text message and hushed conversation, by social media post and shared links. The story grew a little with each retelling, as stories do, but the main facts always stayed the same. A black executive had been moved from her seat for no good reason. She didn't just complain, she gave a demonstration, and an entire airline was now feeling the effect. Up in the cockpit, Captain Ramirez got an update from Atlantic Global Headquarters. Protocol resolution in progress. Miss Reynolds has agreed to limited system restoration. Prioritize customer communication. Expect full functionality within 60 minutes. Bradford authorization. Ramirez looked over at his first officer. Well, it looks like our VIP in 2A has made her point. What exactly happened? The first officer asked. From what I can tell, Ramirez said, Veronica and Walker moved her out of her seat using some preferred passenger rule. Turns out, she's the chief executive officer of Nexus Systems. The first officer's eyes widened. The company handling our whole digital transition. The $700 million contract? The very same, Ramirez confirmed. And it would appear she just gave us a live demonstration of why that contract is worth every penny. Ramirez sighed and reached for the intercom. It was time to give the passengers an update, not just the ones on Flight 372, but indirectly, the thousands of others sitting at gates all across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ramirez again. I'm pleased to let you know that the operational verification affecting our network is currently being resolved. We've been advised that all systems should be back to normal shortly. Our flight is still on schedule, and we really do appreciate your patience through all this. What he didn't say, what you can't exactly say over a public announcement, was that the operational verification was never a technical problem to begin with. It had been about respect. It had been about a principle. It was about the quiet, casual expectation that some people should just accept being pushed aside, being made to feel smaller, being dismissed. And it was about the very clear demonstration of what happens when that expectation runs into the wrong person. As the announcement ended, Dominique felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from Bradford System Restoration beginning. Contract meeting still scheduled for 9 in the morning. Tomorrow, I'll be attending personally along with our Chief Diversity Officer. I believe we have some additional matters to discuss beyond the technical integration. A faint smile played on her lips. Yes, they most certainly did. What the hell kind of stunt was that? James Walker's voice cut right through the first-class cabin. He came storming past the divider curtain, his face a volatile mixture of red, hot anger and deep embarrassment. He stood right over seat 2A, where Dominique was calmly reviewing some documents on her tablet. Do you have any idea how many passengers you have affected? The whole thing immediately drew everyone's attention. You could see phones start to tilt upwards, their little screens capturing the moment the man, who had so casually taken her seat, was now challenging her directly. You could just see that polished, professional look of his cracking under the weight of it all. Dominique, on the other hand, slowly looked up, her expression calm but completely in command. She didn't raise her voice or try to match his frantic energy. Instead, she simply closed her tablet and met his angry stare with a steady, composed gaze. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice just loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear without it feeling like a performance. "I believe you are referring to the system verification protocol that was activated a little earlier." "System verification," he scoffed. "You deliberately sabotaged an entire airline because you did not get your way about a seat." The way he framed it was quite telling, trying to turn her stand against injustice into a childish temper tantrum, her strategic move into some kind of emotional payback. "That is an interesting way to see it," Dominique replied, never losing her composure. "I prefer to think of it as a demonstration of why corporate policies should be applied consistently, no matter who they are affecting." Before Walker could even think of a reply, Veronica Miller appeared right beside him, looking as tense and rigid as a board. "Mr. Walker, please return to your seat. The captain has requested that all passengers remain in their assigned seating." The irony of her sudden, newfound concern for assigned seating was certainly not lost on anyone who was watching. "You do not understand what she has done," Walker insisted, his voice getting louder. "She is holding the entire airline hostage. Thousands of passengers delayed, millions in costs, all because she could not accept a simple seat reassignment." Dominique just sat there, perfectly still, letting his outburst kind of hang in the air. All that emotion he was showing stood in sharp contrast to her measured calm. "Was it simple, Mr. Walker?" she finally asked. "When you took my seat, did you consider it a simple reassignment? Or did you see it as something you were owed? That a regional manager with connections should not have to sit in business class. Not when there is a first-class seat occupied by someone who does not look like she belongs there." The directness of what she said just cut right through all his bluster. Several passengers shifted in their seats, a bit uncomfortably, recognizing the unspoken truth that had just been spoken out loud. Walker's expression hardened. "This is not about race. This is about status and protocol." "Which protocol exactly?" Dominique inquired, her tone sounding more genuinely curious than accusatory. "The preferred passenger protocol that Miss Miller cited when she was removing me. I would be interested to see that in Atlantic Global's official policies." Veronica's cheeks flushed a bright pink. They both knew that no such protocol actually existed, at least not in any official document that could hold up to scrutiny. Just then, Captain Ramirez appeared at the front of the cabin, and his presence immediately commanded the attention of the entire plane. "Mr. Walker, return to your assigned seat immediately. This is not a request." Walker hesitated, and you could practically see him calculating his options against the captain's authority. "This is not over," he muttered to Dominique, his voice low enough that only she could hear the threat underneath. "You are right about that," she replied evenly. "It is just beginning." As Walker retreated back to business class, Ramirez walked over to Dominique. "Miss Reynolds, I apologize for that confrontation. Are you all right?" "Perfectly fine, Captain. Thank you for your intervention." He then lowered his voice. "I have received an update from headquarters. The system verification protocol is being gradually lifted, starting with the immediate departures. The Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Bradford, has requested a full briefing with you upon landing." Dominique nodded. "I will be available, and the $700 million contract discussion scheduled for tomorrow morning. Still proceeding, from what I understand. Mr. Bradford will be attending personally." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Dominique could feel the weight of every eye in the first-class cabin on her. That little confrontation with Walker had turned a private showdown into a public performance, and it showed everyone exactly why she'd had to draw that line in the sand. Eleanor Rodriguez walked over with a quiet purpose, positioning herself to block Dominique from the curious stares of the other passengers. "Mistress Reynolds, dinner service will be starting in just a moment. Would you care to see the menu?" That simple, professional courtesy felt like a bubble of normalcy, and Dominique appreciated it. "Yes, thank you, Elena." As Elena handed her the premium menu, she added in a lower voice, "Just so you know, what happened earlier? It happens more often than anyone wants to admit. Thank you for not letting it go." There was a real weight to her words, something more than just good customer service. It was a look of understanding from someone who'd seen this same scene play out over and over. Someone who knew how much it mattered to stand up to it. Across the aisle, a distinguished-looking older woman, who had been watching the whole affair, leaned toward Dominique. "You'll have to forgive my intrusion," she said, her voice carrying the soft southern tones of old money. But I couldn't help overhearing. "I'm Elaine Woodward, a member of the Atlantic Global Board." Dominique's expression gave nothing away, but inside, her thoughts were spinning. A board member on this very flight who saw the entire thing. "Dominique Reynolds," she replied, giving a slight nod. "Chief Executive Officer of Nexus Systems." "Yes." I managed to piece that together. Elaine said with a knowing little smile. "Thomas Bradford sent me a message about 20 minutes ago. He was, shall we say, quite frantic. I imagine he was." Elaine watched her with open curiosity. "You know, Mistress Reynolds, in 40 years of doing business, I have seen countless ways people respond to, let's call them, violations of dignity. Most people either take it quietly, or they get emotional. Very few respond with such calculated precision. I believe in a proportional response, Miss Woodward. Clearly. And now you have the undivided attention of our entire executive team, not to mention the board." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "This contract tomorrow, it's important to you." "That is $700 million important," Dominique confirmed. 3 years of development, a game-changing deal for both companies. Elaine nodded slowly. "And yet you were willing to risk it all over a seat assignment. That tells me something very important about your principles." "The seat was just the symptom you could see. Miss Woodward, the illness goes much deeper." "Indeed, it does," Elaine agreed, surprising Dominique with how direct she was, which is precisely the topic I'll be discussing with the board after this very illuminating flight. As Elaine turned back to her reading, Dominique took a moment to process this unexpected partnership. A board member had just shown her support, recognizing the incident not as some petty overreaction, but as a stand based on principle against a problem that was baked into the system. Her phone buzzed. It was a new message. This one was from Terrence Williams, her chief operating officer. "Social media is going wild with Hackard, Atlantic Global, and #SeatJustice. A video from your flight of Walker confronting you just hit Twitter. Press calls are coming in about system delays. How do you want us to play this?" The whole situation was growing, moving beyond the airplane, past the airline's internal mess, and into the court of public opinion. This was exactly what she figured would happen when she chose not to make a big scene, not to raise her voice, but to show her power by using the right kind of leverage. She typed a quick reply. "No comment at this time. Let the situation speak for itself. The contract meeting is going ahead tomorrow as planned. Please prepare some additional clauses about corporate culture alignment and diversity commitments." Right as she sent the message, the cabin intercom chimed. Captain Ramirez's voice came on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain with an update. I am pleased to inform you that the operational verification that was affecting the Atlantic Global Network has been resolved. All systems are returning to normal, and our operations across the network are getting back on track. We appreciate your patience during this process." The part he didn't say, the part that was understood by everyone who had seen what happened. On Flight 370, 2 was the direct line between Dominique sitting back down in Seat 2A and the sudden resolution of that, operational verification. It wasn't coincidence. It was causation. As dinner service finally began, Dominique accepted a glass of the champagne she had been offered at the start, then denied, and then offered to her once again. The little bubbles in her champagne caught the cabin light as she raised the glass, just a bit. It was not a celebration. It was more like a quiet nod to a fight that had been fought with precision and had been won. Not with shouting or with drama, but by applying just the right amount of pressure in exactly the right spot. The message had been sent, loud and clear. The real talks would start tomorrow. I believe this goes beyond a simple misunderstanding about seating. Mr. Bradford could hear Dominique's voice, perfectly inside the little private phone booth, in first class. Captain Ramirez had set it up for her so she could make a call to the Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Global. It was a small courtesy that showed just how much the tables had turned. "I agree completely, Miss Reynolds," Thomas Bradford replied, his voice trying to sound both in charge and apologetic at the same time. At 56 years old, he had dealt with his fair share of corporate fires, but not many where the other side held a hand as strong as the one Dominique was holding. What happened was unacceptable, and on behalf of Atlantic Global, "I apologize. I appreciate that," Dominique said. "But this whole thing points to bigger problems in how your company does things. The fact that your staff felt comfortable just making up a rule to move me tells me this probably is not the first time something like this has happened." There was a short pause on the other end of the line, just long enough to tell her she had hit a sore spot. "What exactly are you looking for here, Miss Reynolds?" It was a simple question that got right to the point, beyond just getting her seat back. What was the price for her dignity? What would it take to turn this personal slight into a change that would actually stick? "3 things, Mr. Bradford," she answered, her voice calm and measured, the kind that came from years of making deals. "First, you will turn all of your operational systems back on, effective immediately." "Thank you," he said, and you could hear the relief in his voice. "And second, we are going to make some serious changes to tomorrow's contract. My legal team will be sending over some new language. It will be about holding people accountable for how our two companies blend together, culturally. Nexus is not just handing over technology. We will be setting the standards for how that technology gets used." Another pause, this one a little longer. "That is pretty unusual for a tech contract. So is having your airline's digital weaknesses exposed in the middle of a flight. Mr. Bradford, I think we are a little past unconventional at this stage." She could almost hear the gears turning in his head, weighing the public relations nightmare against the new terms she was laying out. "And the third requirement?" he finally asked. "A complete review of your policies for moving passengers from their seats. I want to see exactly how those policies are applied to different kinds of people. I want the data, Mr. Bradford. Who gets bumped, who gets an upgrade, who gets to benefit when your staff makes a judgment call. And I want an independent, third-party company to conduct that review. You are basically asking for a diversity audit of our whole customer service." "I am not asking, Mr. Bradford. I am making it a condition for us to continue doing business together." The silence that hung in the air after that said everything. She had moved past a simple apology and a free flight into the kind of territory that meant real, structural change. "Miss Reynolds," Bradford finally said, and his voice had changed. It sounded a bit more real than the corporate tone he had started with. "I want to be clear. I personally find what happened to you appalling. But what you are asking for, that needs board approval. It would mean some big changes for us. You have a board member on this very flight who saw the whole thing. Miss Elaine Woodward. She seems very keen on fixing these problems for good." The sharp breath Bradford took on the other end of the line told Dominique that she had just played a card he never even knew was in her hand. "Elaine is on your flight, in seat 3C, yes?" "We have had a very interesting chat about corporate responsibility and making sure people are held accountable." You could practically hear Bradford doing the new math in his head. This was not about damage control anymore. This was about changing the very way they operated. "I will need to talk this over with our executive team," he said at last. "Of course. And I will need to decide if Nexus, a company like ours, can't partner with an organization that doesn't share our commitment to treating people fairly. $700 million is a lot of money, Mr. Bradford, but our principles are what decide who we do business with. She said it not like a threat, but just as a plain and simple fact. The real power she held wasn't just in the digital freeze she'd just caused, but in the promise of all the future business she could simply walk away from. I understand, Bradford replied, and his voice sounded like he truly did. What kind of timeline are you thinking of for getting this resolved? The system verification is already being partially lifted. We'll have everything back up and running when we hang up this call as a little show of good faith. As for the contract, I expect we can discuss the changes at our 9 o'clock in the morning meeting tomorrow. The policy review should begin within 30 days, and I'd like to see some initial findings within 90. Dominique could practically hear Bradford scribbling notes on the other end. And what about the staff involved in tonight's incident? She had been waiting for that question. That classic corporate reflex, to find a few people to blame instead of looking at the bigger problem. I'm not interested in seeing anyone fired, Mr. Bradford. Getting rid of Veronica Miller or writing up James Walker might look like you're holding someone accountable, but it wouldn't do a thing to change the environment that let them behave that way in the first place. That's surprisingly generous, considering what happened. It isn't generosity, it's strategy. Problems with the culture need cultural solutions. I'm looking for a real change, not just a few casualties. And as the words left her mouth, Dominique realized just how much she meant it. This was never about punishing one or two people. It was about showing that there are consequences for that kind of casual disregard. It was about making it clear that her dignity wasn't up for debate. Bradford seemed to grasp the wisdom in her way of thinking. I believe we can work with these terms, Ms. Reynolds. I'll get with our executive team right away and get everything ready for our discussion tomorrow. Just one more thing. Dominique added, I'd like to see Captain Ramirez receive a commendation for how he handled all of this. His professionalism and clear-headedness were really something. Noted, and I completely agree. Is there anything else you need from us before we get off the line? Dominique thought about it for a second. No. I think we have a clear understanding, Mr. Bradford. As she ended the call, Dominique stayed in the quiet of the phone booth for a moment more, just letting the conversation sink in. She had taken a personal insult, a slight, and turned it into a moment of corporate accountability. She did it without raising her voice, without making a scene or issuing demands. Instead, she had simply shown them a kind of power they couldn't ignore, the kind that hits the bottom line, messes with operations, and changes how the public sees you. When she stepped out, Elena Rodriguez was there, waiting to walk her back to her seat. Is everything all right, Miss Reynolds? Yes, thank you, Elena. Just had to finalize a few operational details with the main office. The quiet understatement of what was clearly a very high-stakes call brought a small smile to Elena's face. The captain wanted me to let you know we've received word that all systems are returning to normal. Flights are beginning to depart again all across the network. That's wonderful to hear. As they walked back toward first class, Dominique could feel the change in the air. The other passengers were looking at her differently now, with a new kind of awareness. Their whole idea of who she was had been changed by what they'd just seen. She wasn't just another person on a plane anymore. She was someone who had wielded an incredible amount of influence with a calm and steady hand. Back in seat 2A, her actual seat, Dominique saw a handwritten note resting on the armrest. Ms. Reynolds, I have a feeling we'll have a great deal to discuss at tomorrow's board meeting. What happened tonight says a lot, both about people and about the companies they work for. I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation. Elaine Woodward. Dominique slipped the note into her tablet case, knowing exactly what it was. It wasn't just a gesture of personal support. It was the beginning of an alliance in the boardroom. Elaine Woodward had seen that this little incident was much bigger than it looked, that it was a symptom of a deeper cultural issue that needed to be addressed at the very highest level of the company. As the plane flew west into the night sky, Dominique felt all the complicated feelings from the evening's start to settle into a kind of quiet certainty. She hadn't just gotten her seat back. She had set a new standard, really. She'd shown them that a person's dignity isn't something you can bargain with, and respect isn't something you just hand out to certain people. She understood that real power was not always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet, careful knowledge of exactly where to push to make a real, lasting difference. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Terence. He said the contract changes were in motion, and the legal team was pulling an all-nighter. Apparently, Bradford's people had already called to start working things out. He also mentioned that seat justice was all over the news, and reporters were calling non-stop. He asked her how she wanted to handle the media, and Dominique took a moment to think. This whole thing had grown much bigger than just what happened to her. It was something that could change the entire industry. The story people heard would be just as important as any new clause in a contract. She typed back, "Let's not say anything to the press tonight. Let the facts do the talking for now. Get some notes ready that focus on the company's responsibility, not just this one event. This was never just about me. It is about making sure every passenger is treated fairly." From her seat across the way, Elaine Woodward watched it all unfold. She could not help but admire the quiet, careful way Dominique was handling everything. She was not chasing the spotlight or trying to cash in on her 15 minutes of fame. She was just letting the pieces fall where they may, naturally. It was a smart way to keep the focus on the real problem, instead of making it all about her. The real work, it turned out, was just getting started. And just like that, 3 years went by since that day on Flight 372. What started as one person standing up for herself had blossomed into a whole new way of thinking about accountability across the airline business. Now, Dominique Reynolds stood at a podium, looking out at a sea of faces at the International Aviation Ethics Symposium, all of them airline executives. Tech leaders and regulators were there too, all gathered to talk about doing the right thing for the people who fly. The path that started in Seat 2A had taken her to a place much bigger than one airplane. It was bigger than one contract, and it was certainly bigger than just one airline. The new rules for accountability, the ones put in place after her incident, were now the standard for everyone, and you could actually see the improvements in how fairly people were treated, no matter their background. What made my story different that night was not that I was asked to move, she explained to the crowd of leaders. It was that I had the ability to show them, in no uncertain terms, the real cost of their actions. Most folks do not have that kind of leverage. Their own small injustices just get swept under the rug. No one sees the pattern, and their stories are brushed off as just one-time things. Down in the front row, Thomas Bradford, who was now the executive chairman of Atlantic Global, gave a slow, deliberate nod. With him at the helm, the airline had completely changed how it thought about treating its passengers with fairness. They were the first in the business to actually measure and track how they were doing when it came to fair service for everyone. The numbers, she said. Well, they tell the story. Dominique went on, pointing to a large screen filled with industry data. A 37% drop in unequal treatment over the last 3 years. It was funny to think that one person's simple refusal to be pushed aside had sparked a revolution in how an entire industry held itself responsible. There she was, standing at the podium of the International Aviation Ethics Symposium, looking out at all those airline executives. The room was filled with tech giants and government regulators, all there to discuss the simple idea of treating passengers right. Her long journey from seat 2A had brought her so much further than just one flight. It went beyond a single agreement, and it reached far past a single airline. The systems put in place after what happened to her, well, they had become the way everyone did business now, and the proof was in the pudding. Real, measurable improvements in fair treatment for all kinds of people. The thing about that night, she told the room, was not just that they moved me. It was that I was in a position to show them exactly what that decision cost them. Most people do not have that power. When they are treated poorly, it goes unnoticed, the patterns are ignored, and it is all written off as a one-time thing. Thomas Bradford sat in the front row, now the executive chairman for Atlantic Global, and he nodded, taking it all in. He had been the one to steer the airline toward a new way of thinking about fairness, even creating the first system to actually track and measure it for all their customers. Accountability measures for how everyone gets treated. And as you can see, the numbers tell the story. Dominique added, gesturing to the screen where the industry-wide data was displayed. We're talking a 37% drop in that kind of uneven treatment based on who you are, and that's across all the major airlines. A 42% improvement in just applying the rules the same way for everybody, and a 53% increase in being transparent about how passenger complaints are handled. These are not just small operational fixes. They show a real shift in how we look at basic dignity, not as some optional courtesy, but as a right that has to be guaranteed through accountability. As she finished her speech, Dominique thought back on the path that had led her to this very moment. She hadn't yelled on that flight, hadn't caused a big scene, or demanded to be treated like someone special. She had simply, and with almost surgical precision, shown them the consequences of a casual oversight, turning a single moment of being displaced into a whole movement for accountability. The standing ovation she received wasn't just polite professionalism. It was a genuine acknowledgement of the change she had set in motion, not with a loud fight or demands, but by using smart, well-placed leverage. After her talk, James Walker approached her with the kind of humility you only see in someone who has been truly changed by an experience. He was once the regional manager who had so casually bumped her, and now he was Atlantic Global's executive director of transforming the passenger experience. Life is funny that way. 3 years ago, he said, if someone had told me I'd be thanking you for getting me removed from a first-class seat, I would have thought they were completely out of their mind. He admitted with a kind of regretful honesty. But to experience that firsthand, to feel what it's like when the rules are suddenly used against you, instead of for you, it changed everything about how I saw power and privilege. The change wasn't just in people. Either it had reached deep into the company's structure. Elena Rodriguez, who was once a flight attendant, just trying to survive an impossible situation, had climbed the ladder to become Atlantic Global's chief operating officer, putting new systems of accountability in place at every step of the customer's journey. As Dominique boarded her flight home that evening, she saw the permanent changes that had been made since her own displacement 3 years before. Standard checks were now applied the same way to every single passenger. The service policies were displayed for all to see, and the staff at every counter and gate were as diverse as the passengers they served. Then, the captain's voice came over the speaker. This is Captain Elena Rodriguez. We'll be departing shortly and expect an on-time arrival. A small smile touched Dominique's lips at the announcement. Elena's new role showed another side of the transformation the raising up of voices that used to be confined to the background. As the airplane lifted into the evening sky, Dominique thought of her grandmother's wisdom. Sometimes power is quiet. Sometimes it's just knowing which switch controls the lights. That old saying had turned out to be more literal than either of them could have ever imagined. But the real lesson wasn't about controlling a system. It was about changing it, about using your leverage not for your own gain, but for the good of the whole institution. Power, as it turns out, isn't always loud. Sometimes it moves in silence, building up steam until its effect can no longer be denied. And sometimes it's just knowing which switch to flip. If this story resonated with you, please take a second to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories of dignity, respect, and making change in a thoughtful way. Have you ever seen or experienced a time when someone showed their strength through quiet precision instead of a loud confrontation? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay up to date on our latest videos that aim to inspire and empower. Thank you for watching. A black chief executive officer is removed from a VIP seat for a white passenger. She responds by immediately freezing the airline's $700 billion budget.